Your Legislators is made possible in part by the generous financial support of MAPE members, making Minnesota clean waters, safe communities, quality education, and veterans care happen. We work hard for Minnesotans. Live from St. Paul, Minnesota, we welcome you to another season of Your Legislators, a roundtable discussion featuring state lawmakers who are prepared to answer your questions and discuss important issues affecting citizens of Minnesota. Now, here's your moderator for tonight's program, Barry Anderson.
Join us on this day where the temperature has begun to inch up in the neighborhood of 30 degrees. We may get up to 40 here in a few days. Maybe it's a sign the snow and the cold are going to leave us. We certainly hope so. But before they do that, we'll have an opportunity to visit about the public policy issues of the day, and we're going to be able to do that with our distinguished panel of guests. Now, before I introduce that panel of guests, I want to remind you that this is your program, and hence the catchy name, Your Legislators. So call in your questions to the phone number given at the bottom of your screen, but also feel free to use our Facebook and Twitter addresses as well to get questions to the panel. We're delighted to use all this high technology in order to improve this communication between you, the members of the public, and the legislators who represent you. So let's move, as we do each week, to the introduction of that panel. To my immediate left, from District 20B, Northfield, Representative David Bly. Representative Bly,
yes.
Please, pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here.
Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a retired high school teacher. I taught at an alternative school in Northfield for 20-some years and taught 30 years in Minnesota public schools and became a legislator in 2000 and after the 2006 election and served 2 terms and then had a brief interruption, and now I'm back. So,
What did you teach?
I taught English, and I also was the director of the alternative program there in Northfield.
Okay, so if we have any noun subject, verb subject, we'll take that up with you. So, all right, we have to have these experts, you know. Joining us from District 49, Edina, Senator Melissa Franzen. Right?
Hi, yes, thank you for having me.
Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
I represent District 49, which is Edina, West Bloomington, and then portions of Eden Prairie, Minnetonka. I am an attorney by trade and work at Target Corporation. And this is my first term in the Senate, first term in the legislature, and I guess second session.
And your first time with us.
Yes.
And we're delighted to have you with us.
Thank you.
A regular with us over the course of a number of years, Senator Gary Doms from Redwood Falls.
Thank you, Barry. It's
Did I pronounce that right?
To be here. You're close. I've been called a lot worse.
I've only known Gary for about 30 years, so it's you'd think I'd get it right by now. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm from Redwood Falls. I represent Senate District 16, which is Brown County, Redwood County, part of Renville County, Lyon County, part of all of Yellow Medicine, part of Lac of Paro. I just retired from the insurance business about 2 years ago. Prior to coming into the Senate, I was a county commissioner, and this is my second term in the Senate. So.
Senator, if it makes you feel any better, I butchered Senator Hand's name most of last week's program as well. So you're in good company.
No problem.
And finally, another frequent guest, been with us many times over the years from Cedar, District 31B, Representative Tom Hackbarth. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Thank you for having me again, Barry. And my name is State Representative Tom Hackbarth. I represent northern Anoka County. It's all of Ham Lake, Linwood, Columbus, East Bethel, parts of Oak Grove, and Andover. Just finishing up my 9th term, 18th year, and I sit on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, the Energy Committee, and Ways and Means.
You know, I think we're going to start, if you don't mind, Representative Hackbarth, with a question that we had last week that we didn't get to, and that was whether or not the legislature is going to be dealing with any legacy amendment issues. There were some concerns about the way the committee's organized, maybe some statutory issues. And we didn't have a chance to get to that, and I know you've had some interest in those topics, so let's start with you and tell me what you think about that.
I am on the Environment and Natural Resources Policy Committee and the Finance Committee, but I'm not on the Legacy Committee. However, we did have a hearing on the Legacy bill just the other day, and Representative Hansen is carrying the bill, and I'm sure it's going to move through the House and through the Senate, and it's not going to be quite as contentious as it was last year. I think they've worked out some deals with how the funding works and how some of that funding is going to happen, particularly in the metro area with Metro Parks. I think that was the contentious issue last time. But there are some controversial issues in this bill, and one of the controversial issues was that they're taking some money and giving it to the DNR, and then saying that to the DNR, give this money to the Fond du Lac tribe, and they're going to purchase some land near their reservation and put that into their reservation. So that is a contentious issue that I think that we might hear about maybe on the House floor or in the Senate as well. I had an amendment to take it out of the bill, and I also had an amendment that would say we're going to buy the land with the money, but let's turn it into a WMA. If the purpose of the legacy money is to preserve and protect and enhance, then let's do that if that land is justifiable for keeping and enhancing and protecting. Let's do it, but let's do it as a WMA. I don't think that it was ever meant by the voters for that money to go to a separate sovereign nation. So we'll get some more debate.
Representative Downs?
I don't sit on the Environmental Committee this year, and I have not been on the Legacy, either the policy or the finance part of the Legacy Committee, so I haven't seen the bill that's coming forward this year, but in the past, the parks has been a very contentious issue. Hopefully we got that probably put to bed last year, and I hope that that doesn't continue to be an issue, but that's one of the things that does seem to be controversial. As far as the structure of the committee, I'm not aware of any changes that are being made there, but like I say, I'm not on the inner circle of those committees, so if there are changes, we'll find out about them when they get to the Senate floor.
Senator Franzen?
Well, I also don't serve on any of those committees. I serve on Education, Policy, Transportation, Public Safety, and Health and Human Services, but the debate has been around the issue of parks in the metro versus rural Minnesota. I wish it was more about what we need to do about the state as a whole versus rural versus metro. It seems to be a theme, but that was an issue of contention. Also, what we do with funding for potentially invasive species is also part of the conversation. I remember last session.
Well, I do serve on the same committee with Representative Hackbarth, and heard the concerns that he had about the bill. I think one of the things last time had to do with the decision-making process and whether or not the legislature should just adopt what suggestions were, or if they should weigh in on what some of them are. And I think that's where some of the disagreement happened last time. I think the Fond du Lac issue was in the bill last time, but came out in the end. I think there are different ways of looking at this particular issue. I know Representative Hackbarth has an opinion about it. I think even though we think of the Native folks as a sovereign nation, we also think of them as Minnesotans and Americans, and they have served. And I think that as a part of wanting to preserve land in Minnesota, it's not necessarily out of the question to think that we should assist them in preserving that land as well. So I don't share the same concerns that Representative Hackbarth does, but I certainly can hear his perspective.
I'd just like to add to that. Part of this whole thing with the legacy money is that the land is supposed to be open for hunting and fishing. And this is not something that's up for debate. That's just the way it's supposed to be. And so there's some concern once this land is turned over to the Fond du Lac tribe that hunting and fishing will be able to continue on that property. And that's not necessarily the case. There is an agreement that what they've come to, but they don't have to abide by it. They're a separate nation. They don't have to abide by just an agreement that we made with them that, yes, they're going to let people hunt and fish on the property, but that's just, a contract that they have that they don't really have to follow.
All right, well, let's move on. I suspect we'll be hearing more about that as the weeks go by. Here's an issue we have not had in our first 2 weeks, but a viewer from Crow Wing wants to know what's going on with the medical marijuana issue. Should we start with you, Representative Bly? Any thoughts?
Ken, I get emails about it, and articles come my way, but I have not heard a lot of discussion in our caucus about it, and I don't know that there's been a lot of discussion among legislators. What I hear from my constituents is that there are concerns about those constituents who have problems with their health, and medical marijuana seems to be a good assist with that, and they are troubled by the fact that they can't have access to it if their doctor felt it was something that would be good for them. I hear, on the other hand, from law enforcement, there are great concerns about how do you control the substance that, according to the federal government, is still there are problems with it, and I know that reading some about what Colorado is dealing with there, they've kind of made it all legal. All use, and there are problems with people who sell it because it's can they what would they do with the funds having sold the marijuana, and some banks are afraid to take the money because it's part of as far as the federal government concerns, still an illegal substance. So there are lots of confusing things, and when you shouldn't be driving under the influence. And so I think that there are concerns about it that need to be addressed or worked out if we move down that path.
Senator Franzen, any thoughts?
Well, sitting on the Public Safety Committee, I like to have the law enforcement community supporting this bill, and there has been research in terms of the medicinal value. So the problem is this is a Schedule I drug, so at this point it really hinders the ability for further research and studying, but there has been some, to the extent that it helps, when all else fails, this particular item does work for some conditions. So I'd like to see more about that, having a more thorough discussion about the benefits of it, and having law enforcement be part of that discussion and hopefully being supportive of it.
Well, thank you. I think that we're getting a lot of emails in, and it's some people supporting it, some not supporting it, but I take a look at what the law enforcement community is talking about, and I really put a lot of weight into what the law enforcement community is saying, and I understand there are certainly some values in some people that would certainly receive some relief, probably if they had the ability to use medical marijuana. But I think that we've got a ways to go before this bill is ready for prime time, and at this point, I kind of follow the lead of the law enforcement folks with the concerns and stuff that they're expressing, and I certainly would have to see those issues taken care of prior to. I would want to see this bill move very far.
Well, I'm a second author on the bill. I support it 100%. I think it's something that's long overdue. There's many states that have this already. And this particular bill in the state of Minnesota is going to be the most restrictive, most regulated law in more than any other state that already has this. And I don't see why we shouldn't move forward with it. It's something that's needed and long overdue.
And it's getting a lot of national attention. I remember this morning just watching CNN and having that discussion on national TV. So it is time to have that discussion.
Well, let's move to an issue we have discussed over the last couple of weeks that has proven to be somewhat controversial. There's been a lot of coverage about it in the newspapers, and we have a number of viewers who are concerned about the minimum wage. And as you might expect, they're all over the lot. Some think it should go up. Some think it'll cost jobs. Some think it should go up a little bit. I think it's just time to ask our panel where they think it's going to go. Senator Franzen, maybe we'll start with you. What do you think about the minimum wage, and where do you think we're likely to wind up when all the dust settles?
Well, I wish I could foresee the future, but I can tell you that it certainly needs to increase. We're one of the lowest states in the country, and I think it's not acceptable for Minnesota to be so low. The question is, what rate are we going to get to? And the last negotiations in the conference committee was $9.50. The Senate offered $9.50. We're kind of in a stalemate in terms of the consumer price index. And it's also not just the rate, but it's also about what comes attached to it. How much time are we going to have to adjust to it? I come from the business world, so I understand what that means to large businesses. So I am conscious of that, but at the same time, I know that we need to do something to move the needle forward. And I hope that we're able to do that this session. It's about trying to get the votes in the Senate to be able to support the overall package, which at this point we don't know what it is.
And just so that our viewers understand what's going on, the sticking point, at least as reported by the newspaper this morning, the Star Tribune, is that the House wants an automatic inflation increase. The Senate doesn't want that.
Well, and I wouldn't say,
the
and I
Senate
wouldn't say the
DFL
Senate
leadership.
doesn't want that. I think it depends on the other items that attach to it. We're talking about a training wage. We're talking about how long are we going to take to phase it in. I think we're open to it. I just don't think it's a done deal by taking these things separately. I think it's going to come together.
As Senator Franzen said, the conference committee, they're struggling with some of the language as far as the automatic inflator, and I think they're really still struggling on $9.50 an hour. I don't think that's as given as what we might assume it is. I think we need to raise the minimum wage. I don't think there's any question about that, but I don't think we need to be going $9.50 an hour. My concern comes in is we're raising the minimum wage by $3+ an hour, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to backfill for a lot of the mistakes I think we've made in the past. We've lost a lot of our middle income paying jobs, and we've lost those because of different tax policies and things like that we've used over the years, and businesses have found other ways of doing things. In many cases, those jobs have moved out of Minnesota into other states, out of the country. So what I see happening now is we're starting to look at trying to build some of these middle-class jobs with raising the minimum wage by $3+ an hour, and that's not the right thing to be doing. The minimum wage is a training wage, it's a starting wage, and then we need to have good jobs for people to move into, and in order to do that, we have to look at getting an education program that gets our folks ready to get into the wage earning stream, and right now, from an education standpoint, we're not doing a very good job of offering vocational programs for students in our high schools so they can start getting ready to take some of these vocational jobs that are needed. So I think we have to start looking at a mix, not just raising the wage. We have to bring the education piece into it. We have to do a better job of getting our folks ready for these jobs that we do have out there.
Well, I think that everybody can agree that the minimum wage is probably going to go up, and it probably needs to go up. But whether it's $9.50, I think that's probably a little high. But the inflator is a problem. That is an issue. If you're looking to get Republican votes for the bill, I don't know that you're going to get that with the automatic inflator in there. But the tip credit, I mean, tip credit seems to be a dirty word all of a sudden when you're talking about minimum wage, and it shouldn't be, because this is something that is very, very serious. You'd probably get a lot more Republican votes for a minimum wage bill if you had a tip credit built into the bill. There's different ways to do tip credit as well. So something like that would be a big help along this. I've got Running Aces, a horse racing track in my district, and there's a lot of dealers there and things like that. They make some good money when they make some tips at the card tables that they have there. So I think that there was an issue before the conference committee to try to maybe change that or get that included, at least for the dealers at the horse tracks. I don't know if that's going to happen. I sure hope it does. So if some of those things could happen, I think you get a lot more votes for the bill.
Well, I've heard discussion from my constituents about all of those kinds of issues, and it's good that we are talking about them all. I'm not sure exactly where we'll end up. I believe strongly we do need to increase the minimum wage, and I think $9.50 would be a good place to end up. I think we can do it over time. We don't have to do it right away. It doesn't have to happen next year necessarily, but I think that we can phase it in. But I think it will be stimulative to our economy. I think that the folks who get a minimum wage are likely to spend a good portion of their check in the community and in the economy, and we're going to see that be dispersed through the economy and stimulated. I also think that the minimum wage is something that Senator Adams mentioned, several issues that have changed our economy, and there's much to be listened to in that. But I think also we need to make sure that many women are, for instance, minimum wage earners, and we need to make sure that they have the wage that they can support their livelihood and their families with. So it's an issue of fairness, and I think it needs to be addressed. As I think we all agree on that we need to address it. So I think it'll happen.
Let's talk a little bit about what is the principal topic. We actually have two things we need to talk about in this with regard to this session. One is the unsession, which the governor has mentioned. But before we get to the unsession, I want to say a few words about the bonding bill, because this is a year that typically you see a great deal of activity in in bonding. Maybe I should pick on you, Representative Hackbarth. You're our most senior member here, I think. So talk a little bit about the bonding bill and where you think we're going with that and what might-
Well, I'm not on capital investment, so I used to be and I'm not now. But my concern is that we did a small bonding bill last year. And as that was progressing, that small bonding bill was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And you need Republican votes to pass a bonding bill. I mean, you need the minority votes to go along with it.
Because you got to get to 60%.
That's correct. So you need buy-in from the minority party. What was happening? The bill was getting larger and larger. Representative Hausman had a little bit of problem with some of the negotiations that were going on. It's okay to do a bonding bill in a budget year if you have some emergency things that have to get done. I understand that, and that's okay. But to just add some other things onto the bonding bill in a budget year just isn't right. So there were some negotiations going on. Representative Hausman didn't like that, and we passed a small bonding bill, and we got that done. It needed to be done. So, but with those negotiations, there was kind of a deal that was made that what are we going to look at next year? Are we going to have a $200 million bonding bill this year and then a $1 billion bonding bill next year? We don't think so. So there was kind of an agreement. I don't remember the exact amount, but it was something like in the neighborhood of $800 million for a bonding bill in the bonding year, the second year of the session. So, but now what I'm hearing is the bill is going to be far beyond $800 million. That's a lot more than what the agreement was. And so I don't know whatever happened to that agreement, but there was an agreement. And it's almost like they just tossed that out, or they're not even, don't even remember that happened. And the governor wants a $1 billion plus. I think Representative Hausman wants a $1 billion plus. And I think it's going to be very, very hard and difficult to get Republican votes to pass something like that.
Senator Franzen, your thoughts?
Well, I would say interest rates are still low, and we should take an opportunity to invest in infrastructure in Minnesota because we're lacking, in particular in transportation. And although I believe we need a sustainable, separate funding for transportation, I was a little disappointed that Southwest wasn't on it in the governor's proposal. But I do believe that we need to have a decent amount. I don't have a particular interest of a particular number, but I hope we're a little aggressive and have some projects that are needed and that we're prudent about what those projects are and we are able to prioritize.
I don't recall the agreement, but I wasn't necessarily in negotiations. I have heard since then that both Senate and House and both sides of the aisle, we're talking about an 800,000 figure or 800 million figure. I think one of the things, our side coming in looked at stimulating jobs, finding jobs for folks out there in our economy was an important issue to address, and I think that's why there was pressure on our side to try to pass a larger bonding bill in the first year. I also think that we've had several years of not addressing issues or seeing things being set aside and not addressed. I know, for instance, the community college in Faribault has been pushing to have some repairs done to their buildings and constantly see it vetoed or not included in the bonding bill. There's pressure out there from various entities to have a larger bonding bill. I recognize we do need to have Republican votes to make it happen, and how we balance that out, have a large enough bill to take care of some of the pressure that's out there to repair things, and we do have infrastructure needs. How to meet that is one thing, and yet also to make sure we can balance off and get the votes we need to pass it.
I do remember the deal that was cut, the kind of a global deal, and it was basically $1 billion less what we spent last year. I don't think we're going to bring Republican votes to the table if we get much higher than that, and I'm not so sure how many will be there at that number. So I don't see this bonding bill getting up to $1 billion and actually happening, because I don't think we're going to bring the votes to the table for a bonding bill of that size. I think we'd probably be willing to stay with the global deal. Past that, I think it's going to close the doors pretty quick.
All right, and we'll have a chance to talk some more about that, I guess, in the weeks ahead. Unsession. The governor made this a priority. He's talked about this on several occasions, repealing bills that he doesn't think we need anymore and that can maybe be cleaned up, including apparently, I didn't even know this, but apparently it's illegal to drive in neutral in reverse. But that, among other things, he's identified as potential subjects of the unsession. What do we think about the unsession? We'll start with you, Senator. What do you think?
I attended a couple of the meetings that the governor had his administration host on the unsession. Went through various things that could be taken out of the statutes, could be done away with. I think that the agencies have done a pretty thorough job of going through and picking out some things that we probably don't need. I know one of the things we kind of laughed about that day was the legislation that statutes that handle the telegraphs. We probably don't need to worry too much more about that anymore today. So I think that we do need to clean a lot of that up. In the past, we've called it a reviser's bill and kind of taken care of it that way. But, you know, no matter how we get it done, we need to do it. So the fact that we're getting a lot of this stuff taken off the books is a good deal, and we need to do that, and we need to continue to do that.
You know, one thing I'm curious about, and I would ask the panelists as a whole, I've been around long enough that this question of eliminating, you know, non-controversial old statutes, et cetera, comes up from time to time, and then you run into somebody for whom that particular bill is important. And so I'm wondering if there are any of those bills that the governor's identified, or I shouldn't say bills, but actual laws that the governor's identified as potential candidates for the wastebasket. Have you started to get some pushback? Wait a minute. We need the council on, you know, left-handed plumbers or whatever it may happen to be.
At the meetings I attended, I felt that the agencies were very thorough. If there was any questions, if anybody had any questions about the validity of a bill, if we needed to get rid of it or if we should get rid of it, they were willing to reach out to whoever they thought that might affect and make sure that there weren't going to be repercussions by taking it out. So I do think they're doing a very thorough job of taking a look at what's going to be taken off the books. And there could be some of that, but I think they're safeguarding as much as they can to have that not happen.
Representative Hackbarth, any thoughts?
Well, an unsession, well, that was probably a bad choice of words, I think, because the only way you can have an unsession is if you don't have a session at all. And I'm kind of surprised that somebody didn't get up on the House floor on opening day and make a motion for sine die, because that's the only way you're going to have an unsession. You're right, absolutely right, Senator, that we always have a reviser's bill to get rid of some of these stupid laws that are on the books that we never use or never refer to anymore, and that happens all the time anyway. I have not had anyone call me and say, hold it a minute, you can't get rid of this or that. Some of the things that I've seen, I sit on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, so some of the things I've seen that they're trying to get rid of are pretty non-controversial things. I mean, they did a good job of looking for things they can get rid of, but they're not very controversial at all. So they're going to go away. But what's surprising to me is some of these laws are dumb, and they need to be getting rid of. But for an unsession and getting rid of old, stupid statutes, why are so many agencies, state agencies, introducing more of the same ignorant bills? We had a couple of bills in the Environment Policy Committee last night, that were absolutely insane to even talk about. Getting rid of, making it illegal to do lead wheel weights and things like that. Those things are going away anyway. The industry is changing. They're moving to steel weights, and there was a number of things in that bill that we do not need to address. Everything is changing. They're going away from those things. So why are we putting more of those kind of statutes on the books when we don't need to do it?
Well, then you'll have something to do in the next unsession.
I guess.
Representative Bly, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I agree with Representative Hackbarth that the name probably wasn't the best. But I think the governor is very serious, though, and I think he's sending a message that he wants to make government more efficient. And he challenged his agencies to come up with proposals that would really strip back things that are cumbersome or unneeded or unnecessary. And I think it's a good thing that he's addressing that. I think, we weren't sure what he meant by it or how to address it when we first heard about it. I've taken it to constituents when I go out to town meetings and say, if there's something out there that you would like me to suggest, let me know. I haven't got a lot of people taking me up on that, but okay, it does get some discussion going. But I give them some credit for, I mean, there's been lip service to things about, trying to streamline things or make things more efficient. And I think he's really making an effort to do that. And maybe there'll be other ways of doing it as well.
Well, I've had neighbors who come up with ideas for unsession and actually good ideas that we're putting into bills. I think some of the, unsession is fine, but it's a short session, so there's not a lot of time to do an unsession when you also have to do a bonding bill and you also have to do everything else that we're tackling in this session. So it kind of takes up the conversation, but it's really not the entire picture of what we're dealing with in this short session.
I will say, I can't speak to the unsession issues, but I can say when I started practicing law in 1979, long time ago, the Minnesota Code of Administrative Regulations was 1 volume. It is now 12 volumes. So there may be some material here to work with. That's all I'll say. All right, so we get some questions from time to time on federal topics, and I just want to tell our viewers that we've got some questions about Ukraine. I mean, I'm sure our panel has opinions about Ukraine, but the legislature has frankly limited involvement in that issue. And we have gotten some questions, which I was intending to put in that category, but maybe not quite, about drones and surveillance issues and so forth. There have been some state legislatures that have had discussions or maybe have even passed laws in that area. So I will ask that question. We have a couple of viewers who are concerned about that. Are there any bills moving that deal with either of those two topics, surveillance or drones?
I've heard a little bit of conversation about it, and from constituents I've also heard some concerns. I think there's probably good and bad uses for it. I mean, if it's spying on people, that's maybe not such a great thing, but there may be uses for it for drones in doing some research or being able to go into areas where we really can't send people easily in, or you want to make sure that you can watch things. So I think there are scientific and research uses for them. So I wouldn't necessarily want to ban things, but we may want to look at some of the uses of it and see what control there might be for that.
There were a couple of bills introduced last year.
Yeah, that's right.
But I haven't heard that they were moving at all, but I know that it was discussed last year.
And the only other similar thing I can remember is a bill in the House that's on transportation that might be the cameras and traffic stops. But in this case, it's for work zones is what it's been proposed, and I believe that bill is running in the House. So that's the only thing I can think of that is similar.
I think there's some uses for drones, especially in the agricultural industry. I think there could be some real good uses there. But I think when we start talking about that and moving legislation like that forward, we have to make sure that we have the parameters and explicitly state what the uses can be and make sure we have a control on that. And this, we don't get into areas we shouldn't be going. I don't want to see drones being used for going through stop signs and speeding and stuff like that. But for some of the other areas, I think it could be useful, but we have to be very cautious moving that forward.
So, great question from a viewer. There has, in fact, been some discussion about this. So thank you to that viewer for that. A fact question, just very quickly. A viewer from Villard wants to know, when was the minimum wage increased? When was the last time it was raised? Does anybody know?
2006, maybe? 2005 or 2006, yeah.
I think was the last raise, went to $6.15 for the... I think it was $6.15 was the last raise.
Right, and it's now below the federal minimum wage.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, however, the majority of our businesses have to qualify, so the majority of our businesses pay the federal, but it is below the federal, yes. Yeah.
viewer from Pelican Rapids wants to know, is there going to be a law passed that will allow cities and other governments to bypass newspapers for public notices? And what does our panel think about that? Who wants to take a run at that?
Just had that conversation today with a few constituents and talking about that issue. I think eventually we're going to be looking for our news online, but we're not there yet. So little by little we'll get there. But I think a lot of our communities still rely on the public paper announcements.
In rural Minnesota, in our small communities, a lot of our people rely on getting their news through the local newspaper. And those local newspapers really do struggle just keeping the doors open. And so they rely a lot on the advertising dollars, if not advertising, but the dollars they get in for posting a lot of this information and stuff. So at this point, I think it would be a real struggle for our small newspapers if we allowed that to go online and go off the print media. I think that our rural communities would really hurt by that. And of course, then the offset is that we have a lot of folks out there that would be very limited in their ability to get the news because a lot of people aren't going into the computer and stuff, especially the older sector, and a lot of our communities are aging, getting older.
Haven't heard much about it.
Yeah, I agree with both of what you've said, that we're probably going to get there someday because we are getting things more
We
and
need
more online, but-
broadband first.
Yeah, yes, we need broadband first, and yes, I hear from my small communities that they rely on that newspaper.
You know, one of the
They
issues
don't want it to go away.
that nobody talks about, and obviously I don't take a position on it one way or the other, but where you have, and I spent many years as a city attorney, one of the issues you have when you have municipalities, posting notices to their own website, it is a notice for their own functions, and so there is something to be said for that third-party notice issue. But it sounds like there's nothing unlikely to pass this session.
Haven't heard anything about it.
I would be doubtful.
All right, what about wage increases for personal care attendants and nursing homes? We have viewers who are concerned about that topic. We touched on it last week, had a great discussion. Who wants to take a run at that?
No, I strongly support it. I think
Agreed.
it's overdue.
I think we all do. I think that's one issue that we have bipartisan support on.
Yeah.
We've got some surplus, and I think we can make that happen.
Yeah.
I really support the 5% campaign, and that was one of the campaigns that the Rural Caucus really pushed hard last year. And I just hope, I'm hearing it might be getting caught up a little bit in the Senate now. I hear there might be some issues coming. I just hope that's not the case. I hope that this 5% goes through, because we definitely need to do that, and we need to get those dollars in there so that we can get these folks taken care of, so we can take care of that faction out there, and it's very dire straits they're in. So
Yeah.
we need to move that forward, and I hope it doesn't get hung up in Health and Human Services Committee, and that we get the funding for it.
Well, I serve in that committee, so I will do everything I can to make sure our colleagues agree on it, because it's long overdue.
Number of people have questions about the Affordable Care Act, MNsure, what legislation we're likely to see in this area. The topic is so broad, it's hard to really narrow it down and get specific with particular questions, but certainly MNsure has been an issue. So Senator Franzen, let's start with you. What do you see happening in this session from a legislation standpoint with respect to MNsure specifically, but more generally the Affordable Care Act?
Well, I think we need to let the dust settle, and I've heard that from providers and from plans and insurance, that we really need to wait to see how the dust settles. If we keep tweaking it, we're not going to really know its real impact. But I do certainly agree that we need to fix the kinks in the computer and the exchange side. But those are going to take time, and those are being worked on. With my background in corporate America and in a company like Target, we've had our own glitches, so I understand that those happen. So we just need to get to them as soon as we can and get the best and the brightest. I think with our new MNsure executive director, hopefully we'll be able to make continued progress there. I don't expect any legislation this session. Again, just because we're waiting for things to settle and to see how things are going to end up by the time that people get on board. And right now, I just heard the announcement of another extension, so it's just at the federal level. So there's problems still to be worked out, even larger than Minnesota.
We have some real issues with MNsure, and I agree with the Senator Franzen. We're not going to get to it this year, but that's mostly because they're not going to allow it to come to the House and floor, and I think that's really unfortunate. And we certainly have to let the dust settle, no question about it. But there are some areas to where the dust has already settled, and we need to bring this bill in and fix it. We had several amendments last year that we wouldn't be in this situation today. They would not hear the amendments, and we couldn't get anything changed in the bill. Today, we could bring that bill back, make a few amendments, and make this thing work a lot better. We're looking at people standing out here. We're looking at people losing their insurance. We had a rash of people lost their insurance. They're losing their providers. They have a very limited number of places they can go to get their coverage because of the number of insurers that are carrying some of these plans out in some of these areas. And what we have to do is get this bill back in and get it fixed. We're going to have another rash of people very likely lose a bunch of their insurance again come September. And we can't have these folks that are currently insured have a policy they like, and now we're telling them that they can't keep the policy. They can go get another policy because the existing conditions waivers and stuff like that have been taken out. So they can go buy another policy, but they're looking at paying $3,000 to $5,000 a year more. These people can't afford it. We need to get in and get that fixed, and I would just ask that we bring it back in. Some areas we need to let the dust settle. Other areas the dust is settled. Let's get this thing fixed so that we stop doing harm to more of the people come September, October.
We've got more people on board that are taking the calls. The calls are being handled quicker now. The computer glitches are being fixed. Those kinds of things are being taken care of. But there's bigger problems. And the DFL is actually burying their heads in the sand. This legislature is burying their heads this legislative session and don't want to deal with this issue. They need to deal with this issue, and they're not going to. You won't see any changes in this law this year. We offered some amendments on the House floor today to the tax relief bill that we passed, and thank God we did pass that bill. We can talk about that a little bit later if you want.
We should talk about that, actually.
But we did offer some amendments that were going to tweak this thing, and it was going to fix some major problems, and they were shot down. So that just tells me that we're not going to deal with this legislative session, which is an absolute shame. Why are we doing Obamacare, or why are we doing MNsure in the first place? What was the original point? The original point was to put people on, get health care for folks that couldn't afford the insurance. If you don't have the insurance, we're going to insure you. We're going to have some kind of a program where everybody's going to pay into a system where people that can't afford insurance are now going to have insurance. That's what I thought MNsure and Obamacare was all about, getting people insured so they could have health care. Well, now what are we doing? Now we're actually going to have people that are not going to be able to afford insurance because of MNsure and Obamacare, because it's going to be more expensive for everybody. We're going to have less people insured. We're nowhere near the goal that MNsure was trying to achieve by this time. I think they wanted to have something like 80,000 people or something signed up, and they've got like 30,000 signed up, something like that. So it is an absolute failure that we're not addressing this issue. Something's got to be done. I'm not on those committees, but something needs to be done. This thing got messed up. We need to fix it.
Well, I think there may be some problems with it, but I think it's a much harder fix than some of the bills that were proposed or amendments that were proposed today. I think if it needs fixes, we need to really spend some time figuring out what those problems are and how to best resolve them. I actually am a supporter of single-payer universal health care, so I wasn't necessarily a strong supporter of this type of way to deal with underinsured or uninsured folks out there, but I'd still like to see, because there are positive things in the Affordable Care Act that do move healthcare forward, and I want to make sure that people have access and can get the healthcare that they need. But I think we need time to work through those things in a way where we can have a rational discussion and work our way through it. I don't think necessarily it works to just add an amendment here or there and not really understand the repercussions of all of that. Yes, there are probably going to be fixes that need to happen, but I think we also need to see how it shakes out.
And for the record, I voted for a lot of those amendments too. It's a matter of looking at it. I agree with Representative Bai to actually look at it more holistically, and hearing from the experts, they really do want us to stay away from it and take some time. But there are some things that we're going to have to get back to. Obviously, we're going to have to make some adjustments, but I think it's if we keep making adjustments without seeing how it actually impacts and how it actually rolls out, it's going to be harder to really know what we need to adjust.
Well, if I could just follow up a little on that. The legislative auditor's office, they did an audit on it, and they felt that there were really some severe concerns about the bill. An outside auditing firm, the most recent audit, they just stated that they felt that the thing was so far off center that we'd be better off to scrap it and restart again. It would be much cheaper, provide much better coverage, and be much faster to be done. With that said, there's got to be somewhere in the middle that we can get this thing on track. And I agree with you. You can't throw amendment in here, amendment in there. But last year when that bill was being devised, these amendments weren't just something somebody pulled out of their pocket. These were folks that were involved in the system, understood the system, and were bringing in amendments to build the system so that it would work much clearer than it is now. And what happened last year is we passed the bill that would not allow anybody that was in the industry to participate. So with doing that, we got a bill that's not working, and we need to get people involved that understand the process, understand the bill, and correct it, and move the thing forward. And that's what we're not willing to do. And I'm not saying scrap the thing and throw it away. I think that the Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, what you want to call it, is probably here to stay. It's the law of the land now. But then with that said, let's step forward and do the responsible thing as legislatures. Let's get this thing back on the floor. Let's fix it. We've got people out there that are pretty smart and understand how to fix it. And it may not be just doing a little amendment here, a little amendment there. Maybe there's some sections we're going to have to get very serious about changing. But we should have the will to get out there and do that. It's the people that we're hurting.
Yeah, I agree that there may be some fixes that need to be taken care of, and hopefully we can have an honest discussion about it. But it's been in an environment where there's been a lot of political game playing with the whole thing, and I think how many times in the federal level did they vote to repeal it? And I think there's suspicion, there's a lack of trust that we can really work together. I hope we can. I really do hope we can work together.
Well, I hope we can change it too, because the reality is that everybody is paying more for their insurance now.
I don't think that's true.
That's absolutely
I don't
true.
think everybody
The state of Minnesota,
no.
they keep saying over and over again that the state of Minnesota under MNsure is going to have the cheapest rates in the country. Okay, well, that's fine. But in the long run, those rates are going to go up, no doubt about it. And everybody else's rates are going to have to pay for this system. It's going to be a higher deductibles and higher premiums, no doubt about it.
Well, because you're paying for a more robust package, and you weren't before, so that's part of the law.
Things that we don't need.
Well, I would say preventive services is actually something I would hope everybody needs and actually saves money for the state.
Well, you certainly are paying for a more robust package. And that's where one of the problems is that we have people that have chosen not to have that robust of a package. They're perfectly happy with their health plan. They're very intelligent individuals. They understand what they're buying. And those folks lost their policies because they didn't qualify. They didn't have the robust things that you're talking about. So now they had to come back in the marketplace. To buy a policy wasn't the issue. It was to be able to afford to pay for it. You're stating, that you don't feel that all policies went up, and you're probably right. There are certainly some folks that have gotten insurance a lot cheaper than they had. But a lot of that is the fact that they've got the credit. So if you look at the credit system, that's what's changing that. But where we're really getting into trouble is we don't have the participation. If we take a look at what we need by April 1st, we needed 1,313, it's kind of an odd number, small business to be involved. We have about 120 now. We needed 140,000 people to be in the program. We're considerably less than that. We needed 70,000 people to buy in through the MNsure a private policy. We're sitting at about 30,000. The problem is that we've got the participation is so low that we're just not able to fund this, so we have to find the money. And already we've shifted $403 million out of the Affordable Care Act. That's already been shifted. So where are we going to come up with the dollars if we don't fix the thing?
Well, I think, again, we have to give it time to really see what's going to happen. Massachusetts had a similar problem where their numbers were slow to take on, but I think they've seen some successes and things have turned around for them. But I just think that we do need to make sure how it's working, how it's going to work, before we jump in and change things. And let's give it some time. Let's talk seriously about how we might be able to address some of the concerns that you have. But to make blanket statements that everybody's got it worse. I mean, one of the things is with policies where they're more robust. People don't think they need things until they actually need them. There are people who we have insurance to protect against problems that we don't currently have, but we may have later on, as well as the things that are bothering us.
And I fully understand your comment, but when I have insurance agencies that sell health insurance telling me they lost their policy, these are the professionals selling it. They ought to know. They're smart enough to know what they need. So I don't think we need, I don't think we need Uncle Sam to be our big brother. I don't think the state of Minnesota has to tell a lot of our people out there that are buying health insurance how the process works. A lot of those folks fully understand it, fully knew what they were buying. And what we have to look at is how much more damage do we do before we try to fix it. And you can say we got to let the thing work. Absolutely. There's some areas where we cannot predict how it's going to work, and I fully understand that. There are other areas you can see the direction it's going, and you can see the next roadblock. we need to step in and try to fix those.
And we will probably have the opportunity to do that in the weeks ahead. We're probably not going to resolve that tonight. At least we've only got 8 minutes left, so I don't think we will. All right, so we have two viewers who want to talk about wolves, that famous Minnesota community, unidentified town. What's going to happen with the hunting and trapping of timber wolves in northern Minnesota, and a viewer from Litchfield whose instructions were more direct, protect the wolves. So I don't know what's going to happen with the wolves, but I'm sure our panel can tell us. Should we start with you, Senator?
There seems to be some pushes again to repeal the legislation for the hunting and the trapping of wolves. I don't know if that's going to happen. I think there's an awful lot of influences out there as far as controlling the pack of wolves, controlling the number. I think right now that's being handled fairly well with the hunting and the trapping that we have set up now. I don't see that change coming.
Wolves? Any thought on wolves?
I was the chief author of the bill in 2012. I wrote the legislation. I fully support it. I don't think that we're going to see any change this year in that law whatsoever.
There are people that feel passionate about it on both sides. So we will continue to hear about it, whether or not the votes are there to make a change in it. But I do hear from constituents on both sides of the issue, some who want the hunting to continue and others who are really very concerned that we have to make sure that a moratorium was what they would like to see. Let's give it some time and see if it's worked.
I think this is one of the issues that I heard most about. And
Really? That's interesting.
It is interesting. So very well organized group in terms of against the hunt, and I don't know if there's anything that's going to happen in the Senate. As far as I know, I haven't heard much on a movement on our side, but it has been one of the issues that I probably have the most emails and topics all session.
And consistent.
Yes.
So we have a question from viewers who want to talk about transportation. Just generally, what transportation issues are we likely to see this session? Senator Franzen, let's start with you, maybe.
Unfortunately, I don't have hope for that one, even though I am a passionate advocate for transportation funding. I think we all want transportation funding, sustainable funding. Our roads and bridges are collapsing. They're not being maintained, and we haven't invested enough money here since after World War II. So it's time. If we do nothing by 2020, we're going to have to spend about $50 billion just to be competitive with other parts of the country. And with workforce development being also an issue of having to attract people, we're going to lose people if we don't have opportunities for them to get to and from work, transit options, and others. So we need a multimodal system. I strongly support the Move Minnesota Coalition. I just unfortunately don't think it's going to happen with an election year, but I'd love to work with my colleagues on the Republican side because I think this issue can really, use the best and the brightest from both sides to really put something together that's good for our state.
Definitely a big issue. Transportation is a major issue not only in the Twin Cities but in the rural area, and until we come up with a consistent source of funding, it's going to be some reprioritizing, whatever it takes to get that funding. I would like to see some of the surplus put into the corridors of commerce and take a chunk of that, maybe take $400 million of that and put it in transportation this year.
Well, I think it's a matter of prioritizing. A lot of money goes into transit, and we're subsidizing trains and that sort of thing. I think there's a lot of money if we want to do good for our roads and our bridges. So it's time to reprioritize some of those dollars.
I think we do need to look at transit and moving people in mass ways rather than just relying on roads. But our roads and bridges need work as well. And I think finding the way to continue to fund all of those needs that we have. If things can't move, commerce doesn't work, and people, it's hard to get their jobs done and make sure we get things moved around. So. Big issue.
Representative Bly, we have a question from a viewer in Lakeville. It might even be part of your territory, perhaps. Do you go as far north as Lakeville?
No, I don't go as far as north as Lakeville.
All right. Well, anyway, this viewer wants you to discuss the non-traditional instructional program choice bill that you've introduced.
Okay.
So maybe it's a relative. I don't know. But we do want to talk about it. So tell us a little bit about what this viewer is asking us about.
What this bill it comes from is, in part, the last session we passed education bill called World's Best Workforce. Among the things we want to do is look at the individual needs of students and their strengths, and also the way that they learn. And I think one of the downsides of the accountability and testing we've done in the past is we've seen some programs get ignored or shut down or lost. A lot of those programs are hands-on kinds of learning, things that are more applied learning, some of our ag programs, some of our industrial tech programs, some career tech programs that really going all the way down to elementary school. What we need to do is start thinking about how do we have pathways for kids who learn differently, where their strengths are really have to do with hands-on applied learning, and that's where they're going to be successful. And working in alternative schools, I saw a lot of students who felt after the second grade and experiencing the kind of education system that they did, they thought they couldn't learn. They thought they were unable to learn in the system, and it was very defeating for them, and it was hard for them to advance. So I think we need to pay attention to that and make sure that if we're going to talk about having different pathways for students, we need to make sure that they're in place. So what my bill does is says that every school district must offer what we would consider a non-traditional kind of program, K-12, for students to have access to. I think it's good for teachers, too, because teachers will be able to teach in ways that they're kind of not allowed to right now, because there's so much attention on those kind of academic skills.
Only got about 30 seconds. Anybody else want to follow Representative Bly's comments on that? Senator Franzen, any thoughts? Just very quickly. I
would just add another plug for transportation, and I would hope that eventually we'll get a good transportation package, and we'll be talking a lot about that next time around.
Our veteran legislator, when do you think we go home? Any guesses on when?
A week after Christmas, or Easter. Week after Easter.
Wow. We made news there for a moment.
Week after Easter.
A week after Easter, okay. Agreement, disagree?
I can't tell.
Okay.
We can't continue at the pace we're going right now, though. It's pretty hectic.
All right. I want to thank our panel for joining us this evening. It's been a great program. I want to invite our viewers to be with us next week and the weeks that follow. We will have, in each of those weeks, a distinguished panel of guests to help unravel the mysteries of St. Paul. I do want to mention the Easter week and perhaps either side of that. We may have a special program with some special guests. We're still lining that up because the legislatures may, in fact, not be available. But we were hoping to have a great program for you. We'll be here every week until whenever the legislature goes home. Maybe it's the week after Easter. Maybe it's some other week.
May 19th.
Maybe May 19th. Thank you, and good night.
There's much more about your legislators online at pioneer.org. Find out more about the history of the program, who's been a guest, and watch all our past episodes. There's also a photo gallery, informative links, and much more. You can also get involved and stay in touch by following us on Twitter and join the discussion on our Facebook page. Thank you for watching Your Legislators. Your Legislators is made possible in part by the generous financial support of MAPE members, making Minnesota clean waters, safe communities, quality education, and veterans care happen. We work hard for Minnesotans.